One of my favorite uses for FPGA systems, like this Super NT, is getting high-quality digital captures of games for this channel. Since these are designed to behave as closely as possible to the original hardware, I can represent games without worrying about the accuracy of software emulators or dealing with analog-to-digital conversion. I wouldn't consider them full replacements for the original consoles, but they certainly earn their places in my library. Because they're so similar to the consoles they're based on, these systems even work with complex add-on hardware. The Mega SG can be used with original Sega CD and 32X systems, and the Super NT works with the Super Game Boy. You may think, since the Super Game Boy contains most of the hardware found in an original Game Boy, that this would offer the perfect way to get sharp, accurate captures of Game Boy games too. But there's one main issue preventing that, at least for me. Compare the intro of Wario Land when played on a Game Boy Pocket and a Super Game Boy. Can you spot the difference? The games run a hair faster on a Super Game Boy than they do on a handheld Game Boy system. Why is that? Well, the SNES isn't fast enough to emulate a Game Boy in software, so in order to make it work, Nintendo fit most of the hardware from a Game Boy into a SNES cartridge. The Game Boy software runs on the hardware inside the Super Game Boy, and to make synchronizing the hardware of two different consoles easier, the system clock of the Super Game Boy is synchronized with the system clock of the host SNES. However, the system clock in the SNES is much faster than the system clock in the Game Boy. More than 5 times faster, in fact. Nintendo made syncing the SNES system clock with the Super Game Boy possible by syncing every 5th clock cycle from the SNES with a single clock cycle in the SGB. While the resulting timing is very close to that of an original Game Boy, it's slightly off. In regions with 60Hz TVs, 2.4% faster, and in regions with 50Hz TVs, just 1.5% faster. That clock speed determines the speed of all the components in the Super Game Boy, the CPU, the memory, and so on, so games themselves run slightly faster as well. This is most noticeable in the audio, which is pitched up slightly due to this increased speed. Unfortunately, there's another small difference in timing which makes playing Game Boy games on the TV this way less than ideal. The display in the Game Boy runs at around 59.73 Hz, meaning it can display a new frame that many times each second. This does not match the refresh rates of any contemporary TV signals. Since it's very close to the timing in NTSC regions, it would theoretically be possible to adjust the game clock ever so slightly to make up for the difference, with little perceivable difference in gameplay. But as we just covered, the timing of the Super Game Boy is already set in stone for other reasons. This difference results in the video from Game Boy titles stuttering at a regular interval. It isn't always especially noticeable, but it sticks out pretty clearly in side-scrolling games. These issues would eventually be addressed in a revised model, the Super Game Boy 2, which was exclusive to Japan. The SGB2 runs at the same clock speed as an original Game Boy. While that doesn't address the video stutter, it does mean that games play accurately to their presentation on the handheld consoles, and allow Nintendo to add a link port as well. Because the original Super Game Boy ran slightly faster than handheld Game Boys, linking them together just wasn't possible. The SGB2 is near the top of my list of things I'd like to import someday, especially since the Super NT is made to accept cartridges from all regions. Another difference, which is possibly the most obvious to casual observers, is that the Super Game Boy presents the game window in a slightly wider aspect ratio than the games appear on a Game Boy. Thankfully, displaying Game Boy games with a border allows them to be displayed on an analog TV in their native vertical resolution, but the image is stretched slightly horizontally. In terms of gameplay capture, this isn't ideal, but it is easily fixable either in one's capture software or video editor. So, while it isn't the ideal solution for capturing footage of Game Boy games, I still enjoy the novelty of the Super Game Boy. The fact that it's a first-party product, as well as its additional features and optional enhancements, make it an enjoyable way to play these games on the big screen. It feels authentic, even if it isn't accurate. Just make sure it isn't the only way you experience these games.